my name is Lauren and I am the maker behind Vintage Knitting Party. Welcome back to another episode of Make, Do and Mend, a series in which I endeavour to use up all of the stash and materials that I have on hand to be able to make something new. If you have been here before, then you already know the drill. You know that I have built up way too much stuff around me. I try to live my life in a very sustainable way, but sometimes that means that when I see things secondhand that I can make something out of, I pick it up and I put it into my stash, and it means that I just have too much stuff around me. You will also know that I have written down everything that I can think of to make in this room, and I have put them all in this pumpkin, and every episode we let the pumpkin decide what I'm going to be making. I am hoping for an elaborate sewing project today. I'm actually on my Christmas New Year's break and I have all the time to be making something kind of fancy from scratch, but we will see where the pumpkin takes us. If you are not new here, please consider subscribing. I make a lot of sewing and knitting content that also focuses on sustainability, and I would love to have you here. Let's go for it. Ooh, okay, it's a make. It is what I hoped for. Let me get the fabric and I'll talk you through it. So the fabric that I have written down here is this bright rayon. It is pink, orange, blue, purple, yellow. It has all of the colors. It's a beautiful retro floral print. These are very much my colors. I was very drawn to this when I first bought it at Spotlight quite a few years ago now, I think. And the project that I've written down to make out of this is a little puffy sleeved maxi dress with shirring at the waist. This is actually a style that I've made before, and I make it using an 80s pattern that I've hacked, but I might want to make a few more modifications to it. So let's get into it. I have today and I have tomorrow free, but I'll be jumping in and out, like running errands and doing other things. So if you see a few lighting, setup, costume changes, that's because I might be completing this project over several days. But I'm excited to take you along with me. Now this is the pattern that I generally use for this type of dress. It's the Simplicity 5434. You can see I got it from Lifeline for $2, which I think is pretty amazing. And I was drawn to this dress because I had seen a lot of dresses with shirring around the waist, like cute little puffy sleeves, and otherwise like being quite like light and floaty, which was definitely what I was looking for. I know this dress doesn't look like much, but you have to trust me that it is going to work out just really, really well, okay? Now I've just zoomed you in a little bit so hopefully you can see, but there are really sweet little pleats along the neckline that give the bust some nice shape. All of these versions are worn with a belt, but the original pattern is just straight up and down with plenty of ease, which makes it perfect for adding a little bit of shirring in at the waist. And the sleeves have a really gorgeous little puff on the head, which I think looks very 1940s. I really love this style of sleeve, and in the past I've just added a little bit of shirring around the cuff as well to make them nice and, you know, flouncy and puffy. I think this rayon is going to be really nice in this pattern because I think it'll have a lot of drape. From memory, I think this was a little bit snug on me last time, so I may just need to add in an inch or two around the bust and maybe make the sleeves a little bit bigger. But that's okay, I can do that easily. And hopefully I have enough fabric to make a really long maxi version of this because I think that would look really beautiful. Here I am just ironing my fabric. If you have a cheap and dodgy iron like I do, and you're a little bit afraid of the steam function, spraying a tiny bit of water and then ironing really helps to get rid of all of those stubborn wrinkles. Now I've laid out my pattern pieces on my fabric, everything is pinned, I have enough fabric, which I'm so happy about, and there are a couple of things that I wanted to talk through with you before I actually start cutting. I always like to take this minute before I cut into the fabric to really slow down, think about what I'm actually doing, make sure that I've got all of my bases covered, and I thought I would run you through a little bit of that process as well. For every project that I make, I always put a little entry in my notebook with all of the measurements, modifications, the cost of my supplies and materials, all of that kind of stuff. I just really like keeping track of everything that I make, but it's also really handy, I think, if I make this type of dress again in the future. I don't have to do all the maths around measurements and modifications and things like that again. Let's go through probably the three main things that I wanted to make notes about. The first one is the fit. So I did not go off the measurements on the back of this envelope for two main reasons. One of the reasons is that I never really trust the measurements on the back of the envelope, especially with these big four patterns. Indie patterns I tend to trust, but These ones, you just never know what you're going to get. Like, you never know whether it's not a lot of positive ease, you never know whether it's like literally 10 inches of positive ease. So I usually just measure the pattern pieces anyway. The second reason that I'm really not trusting these measurements is because this is a pattern from 1984. Especially in Australia, the fashion seemed to be that we loved everything giant and oversized, especially around the shoulders. And even though this is technically one size too small for me, I was kind of hoping that the amount of positive ease that would be included would make it fit on me a little bit more like a modern pattern, if that makes sense. So they would kind of equal each other out. So I did my calculations, I figured out how big I wanted this to be across the bust, and including seam allowance, I needed the entire thing to be 45 inches, which equals a total of 22.5 inches across the front and across the back for the whole piece, or 11.25 inches for just one half of the pattern piece, which is how this pattern is cut. I measured the pattern pieces and it is 46 inches all the way around. I probably still will add just a tiny bit on this to be on the safe side for seam allowance, because I'm going to be doing French seams, just because I get a little bit nervous around that kind of stuff. And I want this to be really nice and like loosey-goosey and easy to pull on. So for the most part, the bodice pieces are fine. I'm probably just going to be adding in like 1/2 inch on each side seam, which is not a big deal. I don't need to redraw anything. I'm just going to be trying to remember that as best I can when I cut everything out. I remember last time I made this, the sleeves were just a little bit tight. So I wanted to measure my upper bicep against the pattern piece and see how that fitted, because even though there's a lot of ease in the body, the sleeves they're puffy at the top, but then they're quite fitted really through the bicep. When I measured my upper bicep and figured out exactly how big I would like the sleeve to be, I figured that I needed it to be at least 16 inches to include a little bit of ease there so I can actually wear it. And I need 1 inch of seam allowance on either side of the pattern piece. And that equals a total of 18 inches that the sleeve piece needed to be. When I measured the pattern piece, it was actually only 16 inches. So when I cut it, I'm just going to cut an extra inch on like either side of the width of the pattern piece and then just grade it so that it still has its original shape, but it's just got a little bit more width in there. So that's all I need to change for the fit, which I'm really happy about. Okay, the next section that I wanted to talk about were the notions that I'm using. I really could have gone for so many different colors in thread, but I've gone for this beautiful lilac periwinkle blue color. It's such a pretty color. I love it so much. I've used it in other projects and I think it's lovely. There's going to be a little bit of top stitching in this, and I just think this color is going to be subtle enough that it won't be overpowering, but in the times that you do see it, I think it'll be a really, really cute match. And then I think the only other thing that I have to use is the shirring elastic that I got from Spotlight. It's fairly straightforward, I suppose. Now, onto the modifications that I will be making to this dress. There are a few. I'm going to be doing the whole thing with French seams. I love French seams, especially in a lightweight fabric like this. I just think there's no other seam finish that is quite the same. So I'm very excited about that. I am going to be elongating the dress by just a little bit, and I'm also adding a ruffle at the bottom because I think that everything in life is better with a bit of a ruffle. I'm going to add shirring around the waist and on the sleeves. On the bodice pieces, there is actually a section at the bottom which is the area marked for blousing, which I think is the little overlap on the top of the belt here that blouses over the waist, I suppose. I'm not going to be changing anything in that area. I still want that extra length there because the shirring will make everything shrink up quite a bit. I'm going to be cutting the bodice and the skirt as one because I think the shirring will be a lot easier to do if there is no seam there, and I don't really see why I need to add one. I'm not going to have a back seam. I'm cutting the back all in one piece as well because I'm not having a zipper in the back like the pattern specifies. I don't know why you would add a zipper to this dress because from memory it's big enough to just pull over your head, especially because there is no tightness around the waist. It's all, well, I'm adding elastic, but otherwise it's just loose. But in place of a zipper, just in case it's not big enough to pull on over my head, I'm going to be adding a little keyhole at the back, and I'm going to finish that keyhole with bias tape cut from this same fabric. The other modification that I'm going to be making is not including facing. So again, from memory, the last time I made this pattern, I did the facing, and even tacking it down and understitching and trying to secure it with hand stitching, it was either really obvious or it would keep flipping out. I think just because of the weight of the fabric. I don't know, I don't love facing at the best of times, so I'm sure there's something that I'm missing there, but I just think this would be so cute with a little bit of bias tape around the neckline. I'm going to extend the bias tape around the neckline past the keyhole opening for a little length and just stitching down that bias tape to create a tie that will secure the back keyhole as well. It's something that I've done in another dress and I think it worked out fairly well. And I think those are all the modifications that I'm going to be making. There's nothing else that I think I need to update you guys on. I'm just going to be cutting away at this and you'll probably see me tomorrow when I'm ready to sew everything together.
As soon as I cut everything out yesterday, I stay stitched the neckline. There is nothing worse than having something stretch out immediately after you've cut it so that you can't use it anymore. And now I am just creating the pleats on the front of the bodice. I stitched the pleats down using a 2mm stitch length. They look so beautiful. I love this little detail on the front of the bodice. The next step is sewing the shoulder seam, and I am doing this using French seams. To do a French seam, simply sew the wrong sides together, trim down the seam allowance. I know it feels strange to do this. Press the seam open, and then press the seam flat to make a crisp edge, and then sew the right sides together. This creates a beautiful enclosed seam with no raw edges, and this is what it looks like from the right side. The pattern then has you top stitch down that seam facing towards the back. Now you'll have to excuse my ironing board, it has been roasted in its time, but I wanted to share how I make my own bias tape. What I do is pin these little pins down onto my ironing board, and as I slide the fabric through, I've left enough space there to press down on the fabric using my iron, so I just make sure that it is as even as possible. The pins help it stay controlled and in shape, and then I just press slightly to form the bias tape. I have a fancy bias tape maker, but I like this method better. I also wanted to share how I can manipulate the bias tape to fit into something like the keyhole opening in the back of this dress. As you can see, I just press the bias tape down in the shape in which I want it to be eventually sewn into. This makes it so much easier to sew into the garment, and it means that I don't get any weird puckering or issues with shape, and it just makes life so much easier. I sewed on all of my bias tape, and here she is. It's coming together so well. I love the bias tape finish around the neckline. The construction of this dress is really interesting because the back bodice pieces come over the shoulder to meet these pleats in the front. You can see the keyhole opening and where I have extended the bias tape past that opening to form the tie. I love the way this turned out. The keyhole is adorable, and I think it's coming together so well.
Hello again, it is day 2 of sewing. I only sewed for a couple of hours yesterday because I went out and did fun stuff and ran errands and saw my friends. So there are 3 main steps left in making the dress, and I'm hoping to get it all wrapped up today so I can wear it tomorrow for New Year's Eve. I have to do the ruffle at the bottom. I've just got some long rectangles cut out which are double the width of the dress. I've got to do the sleeves, which I think will be pretty straightforward. And then I have to do the shirring. Yeah, it sounds fairly simple, but I think it's going to be a little bit more elaborate than that, but that's okay.
I finished the side seams of the body as well as the side seams of the ruffle using French seams, and then I sewed this tiny little baby hem all across the bottom of the ruffle. I did this by making one very long line of stitching all across the bottom, trimming it right down, folding it over twice, and then making another long line of stitching to secure it all. By creating that first line of stitching, you make a rigid sort of edge to easily make the double fold, and it gives you a lot more precision. I always sew at least 2 lines of gathering stitches, if not 3, at a 4.5mm stitch length. I find that this gives me the most even gathers when I sew more than one line. I also like to sew one inside of the seam allowance and one outside of the seam allowance, because that means that one of them isn't visible at all and the other is really, really easy to remove when you are done. This is a very tedious part of the process that uses up a lot of thread, but it is essential and it gives such a cute finish. I then pulled on the 2 threads at the end to be able to gather up the panel. Here I am sewing the ruffle to the bodice. Yes, you can sew a ruffled panel into a French seam, you just have to go really carefully and take your time. So I always try to sew the gathered panel facing upwards so that I can make sure that no pieces of fabric get stuck in weird ways, and you just have to take your time, remove your pins as you go, just go slowly and I promise you will be okay. Now I potentially wouldn't do this if I had a plain coloured fabric, but because this fabric is so busy, I think I can get away with it. And actually top stitching the seam allowance to face upwards so that the ruffle lays downwards, if that makes sense. I just really wanted this ruffle to sit nicely. I didn't want it to poke out at all, and I thought a line of top stitching would work really well. Luckily my thread colour I think is a perfect match, and it actually looks really cute when you do notice the top stitching. Here is my beautiful ruffle at the bottom of my dress. I think it looks so nice. I can't believe it, but it's finally time for the sleeves. I sewed up the seam using French seams. I created a baby hem all around the bottom, just like I did on the bottom of the ruffle piece. And then I sewed some gathering stitches between the two markings on the sleeve head to give it that really puffy, voluminous, classic shape. I used a French seam to ease the sleeve into the armhole. As you can see here, this part got a little bit fiddly with all of those gathering stitches and trying to do French seams, but I went slowly and everything was okay. Now onto the final part, the shirring. Always keep your scrap pieces of fabric close by for tension tests such as this one. You can see the top thread and then the elastic underneath, and I was actually really happy with how this test run turned out, so I just went ahead and started shirring. On the sleeves, I did my first row of shirring 4 centimeters from the bottom. I did 3 rows in total, all 1/2 centimeter apart, and I love how that turned out. On the body, I marked my waist measurement using a water erasable marker. I made sure I ruled a straight line. I did my first row of shirring, and then I did 5 rows in total, all 1 centimeter apart, moving downwards. As you can see, there is a lot of fabric going on here, but I took it slowly and made sure I focused on making sure my tension was okay. Now I promise you're going to get a proper reveal in literally 1 second, but first I just wanted to show you again the original pattern envelope and how 80s it looks compared to the actual dress that I made, and just how gorgeous she is. I'm so happy. All up, not including labor, this dress cost me $36.50. $3 for the shirring elastic, $3.50 for the thread, $2 for the pattern, and $28 for the rayon, which I got from Spotlight a few years ago. I absolutely love this dress. I don't think there is a single thing that I would change about it. It is so comfortable, and I can tell that it's one of those dresses that will just be so easy to wear, but looks so fancy and will be great for work or going to friends' places, days at home where I want to feel a bit fancy, but I don't want to put on fancy clothes which are uncomfortable. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this journey as well, and I will see you next time.